What we have before us are data for 20 countries on two variables. The first variable is percent of a population that resides in an urban area, and the second variable is life expectancy at birth in years. Both of these variables come from the UN Development Program and are for the year 2015. The first question we have to ask when constructing a crosstab is which will be our dependent variable and which will be our independent variable. In essence, what I'm interested in here is explaining variation across these 20 countries in life expectancy, and I'm wondering to what extent does the percent of a population that resides in an urban area influence life expectancy. So my dependent variable will be life expectancy, and independent variable will be percent urbanization. Now, when constructing a crosstab, the dependent variable will be along the y-axis, the side of the crosstab, and the independent variable will be along the x-axis along the bottom. The first thing we'll do is highlight the data range that we want to plot, come up to Insert, and we'll come over here to where we see a little tiny scatter plot. And I'll left mouse button click to open up the options, and I'll just choose, you can see very quickly as we scroll down here what they look like, the different options. I'm just choosing here the basic scatter. Now, what Excel does, it refers to this as an XY scatter, and what that tells you right there is that the variable that will come to the left will be treated as the X variable and plotted along the bottom, and the variable to the right will be treated as the Y variable and plotted along the side. And this harkens back to basic math in middle school or high school, where we're given a Cartesian plane and we can identify any sort of point on that plane with XY coordinate. And so that is where it comes from. So now that we have the crosstab, we can move it around here if we so choose. But what I like to do is I like to put the crosstab on a separate sheet by itself, so it doesn't obscure what I may have on the crosstab, the data page that is, and also makes it larger for me to see what I'm doing as I'm editing it. So come up to once you select the crosstab, you'll notice that when you select the crosstab, Chart Tools opens up. I'll click on the Design tab and come over to Move Chart. Click on New Sheet, and I'll just call this Scatterplot. Give it any name you want. And right there we have it. Okay? Now the first thing I'm going to do is remove the grid lines that we see. Just clutters up the Scatterplot with something that's not really necessary for us. Just place your cursor on any one of the grid lines and just hit your delete button. Now I'll delete the other ones. Again, place your cursor on any one of the grid lines and hit the delete button. But I do want to place a border around the chart area so it's separated from the titles and the numerical values that are listed along the axes. So with your cursor somewhere in the plot area, choose a right mouse button click and come down to Format Plot Area. I'm going to come up over here to Border, and what I'm going to do here is click on the Color button, and I'll just choose black for the color. That comes up with the blue here. Let me do that again. There. And there you see a black border. But now that black border really is only along two sides of the scatter plot. You actually have along the x-axis and the y-axis are actually light gray borders. To make them the same color as what we saw, or what we see on the other two sides, I'm going to just click on this axis, right mouse button, Format Axis, I select with the left mouse button, and I'll come over here to the paint can, and you see line. I'm going to make it a solid line, and now it comes up with my last option of black. And now you see it's a darker line as what I used before. I'll do the same thing over here. Choose Format Axis, come over to the paint can, come down to line, click on solid line, and there you see the most recent color I've used is black. If it doesn't come up, then just choose black. And there we have what is our plot area that has a border around it. Now the next thing I want to do is to just add some basic titles, and the first thing I'll do is add a chart title. So I'm going to click somewhere on then the plot, come up under design, and all your chart elements can be added over here with this particular button. Now you can also notice that you see this green button here is another way which you can add the chart elements, but I'll just go up to the design and chart elements, and there you see we have our options. I'll add the chart title, and I'll choose the above chart. And now what I can do is just place my cursor up in the formula bar, and I'll type in the title Scatterplot of National Life Expectancy by Urbanization. And I'll comma 2015 so we know when the data are from, and hit enter. And right there is our title. I'll do the same thing, the process to come over and add the axis titles, the primary horizontal, which is going to be population in urban areas. And I'll put in parentheses the units as percent. Again, design tab, come over to add chart elements, axis titles, but this time I'll do primary vertical, and just start typing. And this is going to be life expectancy at birth, and I'll put in parentheses here the units, which is years, and hit return. And right there we have our basic scatter plot. Now that we've constructed the basic scatter plot, I'd like to modify the look of it. And the first thing I'd like to do is to change the font that all the writing is in. And in particular, let's say I want to coordinate with the report which it's going into, that is in Garamond. So what I'm going to do is highlight then the text, right mouse button click to bring up the font options. I'll change it to Garamond. And let's say I want to make it a little bit larger. Now the size of your font may be a function of what the format will be in which you'll be showing it to people. If it's going to be in a report and the scatter plot needs to be scaled down, then perhaps you want a larger font. At PowerPoint, you may not need to have such a large font. The next thing I'm going to do is change the font color. The default in Excel is to use a dark gray, and I want to make it a solid black to make it really stand out, easier to read. And I'll do the same thing for the axis titles. Let's make this a font size of 14, and again I'll change it so it's a dark color, the solid black there. Same thing with this axis title. Let's make this a 12 font size. I'll change it to a solid black. I'm sorry, let's make that a 14 so it's consistent with the other axis title. There we go. Now let's change the numbers. This I want to make a 12, so it's a little smaller. And I use the same thing for the other labels here for the x-axis. Okay, now we changed our text. The next thing I want to do though is to change the numerical labels that we see for our axes. You notice that the numbers are taken out to the 10th, while they all have a 10th of 0, so that .0 for these labels really is not useful. I'm going to click with the left mouse button to highlight this axis. And what I'm going to do now is come down to Format Axis. And here where it first of all comes up, it's on the Axis Options, a little bar chart looks like. And one of the things I can do here if I so choose, since there's no country that has a life expectancy at birth that is below 40 years, I can change this to 40. And now you see it rescales everything. So if you want to rescale your axes, this is where you would do it. But I'm going to go back to 0. I like to always have my tables and my charts where possible, rather, to have that 0, 0 in the lower left-hand corner. What I am going to do, though, is come down to where it has number. And instead of custom, I'm going to just choose a regular number. And here in the decimal place, I'm going to change a 0, or the 1 to 0 rather, and hit return. Notice I've gotten rid of the .0. Now if we just had a 1 there, which was before, and I tried to delete it and just hit return, it's still going to be there. So I actually have to place in 0 decimals. Let me do the same thing for the other axis numbers. And there I've changed the axes. Looks much nicer. The next thing I'd like to do, perhaps, given the number of data points that I have and the amount of the area that we see in terms of the plot, I'd like to make the symbols that represent each data point larger and a different color. To do that, I'll first move the cursor on top of one of the data points, right mouse button to select, come down to Format Data Series, and I'm going to click on the paint can, which is Fill and Line Options, and I'll come down to Marker Options. These are the markers for each data point. Presently it tells us that it's using a circle, blue, and it is size 5. Click on the down arrow key, you notice there are other options that you can use, but I like using the circle. What I want to do, though, is make it a little bit larger. Now after I've made it larger, I can also change the color. And there are two facets to the color change. The first is, or one of them is the border that surrounds the outside of the circle of each data marker here. And the other is the center, or the fill. I'm going to choose a solid fill, and let's say I wanted to make it black. And I'll do the same thing with the border. Well, first of all, let me show you what it looks like when I don't change the border. And you notice there's a little bit of a blue halo around each one of these data points. So let's go back and not only change the marker options that we've done so far, I'll come down and make it a black border as well. And there, we have a black circle. And that may be a little bit too dark for the center of the table. Maybe it's fine for the border and also for the text. So perhaps what I can do here, again, select, come down to marker again, and let's say I may want to have perhaps a gray, one of the darker grays, changing both the border and the fill, and that looks pretty good. If I wanted to put that into some sort of report, I would recommend using some sort of grayscale, black or gray, in order to print up any of your scatter plots that go into a printed document. But what I'm going to do right now, though, is change this to a different color, since this is just for the purpose of this presentation. Make it the orange color, doing both the fill and the border. And right there we're able to change the size of the marker as well as the color. Now there are two additional pieces of information I'd like to add to this chart just to show you how it can be done. One of the things I always recommend where possible is to indicate the source of your data if you're getting the data from another source, that is, you haven't collected it yourself. To do so, click on the chart somewhere so that the chart tools come up, and then click on the Format option, the Format tab. Come over and we'll select the text box. Now we can use a text box to write anywhere on the graph, but I'm going to go down to the lower left hand corner and I'm going to type in source UN Development Program 2015. Now you can't see it right now. It's gone below the graph itself. If I pull that over a little bit farther, you'll notice then we have a little more room to display it. I still can't see both lines. In that case, I'll just pull this down just a tad so now we can see. Oops, I'll go a little bit farther below. And you see the text is there, but it's not displaying it. What I'm going to do is change the font size and see if we can't get it to display. Right now it's font sized 11. Let's change that to a 10. And you notice it can be displayed now. Let's go ahead and highlight that data and that information rather. I'll come down to to select Garamond, so we're consistent here. We have right there. And I'm also going to make the source, word source there, in italics. And that's how we go ahead and add a text box to a graph. The next thing I want to show you how to add is to add data labels. To do so, click on the data points that you see there in the graph. Right mouse button to open up your options. Come down to add data labels, and I'll choose data labels and click the left mouse button to select that. Now what it comes up with right now are numeric values, but if I go ahead and click on one of those, you notice they all are selected. Now I'll come down to format data labels. I want to change that information that's being reported, and what is being displayed are the Y values for each case, as we can see here. That's checked. What I want to do though is display the country names. So I'll click on values from cells, click on this spreadsheet icon right there, and now I'll go to where the data are, and I'll click and drag to highlight then these country names. Click back and select OK. Now it's showing both the Y value and the country names. Let's go ahead and turn off the country names. And I'll close this so we can see what we have. Now these are the names of the countries of each individual case. You notice how they run together a little bit. It may look a little better if they were off on a different side. Selecting one of these labels, I'm going to go back to Format Data Label, and you notice here I can change the positioning of all these cases. Let's put the labels off to the left and close that up. Now they still overlap a little bit, not as much as they did before, but what I can do now is select them one at a time, and I'll double click on one of them. And for example, this one right here, I'll move it so I can, I don't want to change that right now. What I want to do is here, click and drag it to move it up so it's a little higher, so it's not over top of the one before. I'll do the same thing perhaps with Dominican Republic. Double click on it. Click and drag to bring it down a little bit. Maybe I can click and drag this one up a little bit because it was over top of India. There are two data points right here. And there you can see how we can spread these out so they look a little nicer. And I'll even move Bhutan up a little higher so it looks a little nicer. Now I can change the font so it's consistent with what I've done so far. Just click once so they all are selected. Left mouse button, come down to font. I'll change it to Garamond like we've done thus far. And right now it's a font size of 9. Looks a little small. I'll make it 10. And click OK. And there, that looks a little nicer. The last thing I'd like to do is demonstrate how we can superimpose a regression or a trend line over top of these data. I'll come up under the Chart Tools options, click on the Design tab, and come back over to the Add Chart Elements. And as we scroll down here, you notice there's a trend line option. What we're going to do is come over and choose a linear trend line. Now this reports then represents on the scatter plot the regression line that best fits these two variables. I'm going to click on top of that regression line, right mouse button rather, to open up the options, come down to Format Trend Line and click on the left mouse button to select that. You'll notice that there are various options here: logarithmic, polynomial, power, moving average. What I'm going to do first of all is just change the look of this line. It currently has a blue line. I'll make it so it's sort of in the same color scheme. I'll make it a little darker perhaps than what we had before. And you notice I can choose different line type. Right now it has dots. I'm going to make it a solid line. And go ahead, I'll close this up. And there we see the regression line then that best fits or summarizes the relationship, a linear relationship between these two variables. Let me go ahead and click on it again. I'll go back to open up the Format Trend Line options here. And you'll notice, as I mentioned before, we can, if we wanted to, if we thought that there were different kinds of relationships, we could superimpose those over top, but we'll stick with the basic linear regression. But as we go down towards the bottom, you notice we can click on Display the equation on the chart and also display the R-square value in the chart. I'll close that up. And right there we see that information has now been added as a text box. I can drag that text box and put it anywhere I want to on the chart itself. Let's go back in here, and I'm going to make the Y a capital Y just so it stands out a little more, and the X here a capital X. Now what it does here, it lays out the regression line in the format of Y equals mx plus b, where m refers to the slope and b refers to the intercept. What I like to do instead is have it Y equals, and then I put the intercept, so just clicking in that text box. I can now take the intercept, is that 54.1, I'll make it, and then we see that's a positive, and I'll go ahead and just delete those intercept values there, and now I've just switched that line around, so instead what we see then is that the intercept is displayed first. Keeping consistent with the fonts that I've used so far, I can go ahead and click and drag to highlight this information. Let's go down and choose Garamond one last time. Let's see as I come down to the G's. There we go. And to make it a little more obvious, easy to read, I'll make it, let's put it up to a 14-point font. And right there we see we can display the regression line also on our scatter plot.